Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to the Restless Cabal on Mythic. So this version of the encounter is a massive step up. The main reason for the fight having such a large difficulty leap is primarily due to both bosses having over double the health pool they had on Heroic, and as a result you're forced to play the fight out a lot riskier than you did in the easier versions of the fight. But before we get into it, let's cover the new mechanics first. So first to mention is the Relic changes. Whilst their effect remains the same while they're active, there's also one new ability added to each of them. After the trident is activated, it will spawn oceanic essence bubbles near players. These little orbs will stun you for 8 seconds if you run into them, and being stunned can be really bad as potentially you can be targeted by void crash circles, which on Mythic will flat out one-shot you if they're at their maximum size. Now orbs can be soaked by immunities to be cleared up, which we do just before the first and second storm activations towards the end of the fight. One thing to note for these orbs is that they will despawn after you reactivate the Trident Relic for the second time, but new ones will continue to spawn for the rest of the encounter. This isn't particularly relevant information for the strategy we're going to be sharing with you, but it might be useful if you wish to make your own relic order. Now we start the encounter with everyone on the outer edge of the room and we slowly rotate clockwise as new orbs spawn. This keeps the middle of the room clear for the most part when it comes to stacking for the storm damage later on and when you need to go in there to interrupt some adds. As for the Void Stone, it will begin to drag all players towards the relic for 10 seconds every 40 seconds or so. This effect becomes stronger throughout the fight to the point where you can't really outrun it anymore. Being dragged directly into the relic doesn't deal any damage or have any negative effects whatsoever, it's just that the pull-in can make dodging orbs or void crashes that little bit more difficult. Now the strength of this dragon is reset when the relic is activated for a second time. And finally, when the storm relic is activated, it will spawn storm essence orbs. These orbs will deal a small amount of damage to the nearest player, applying a stacking damage taken increase directly from the orb. This effect also acts like the storm relic damage, where if you drop below 25% health, you'll be instantly killed. Now for the most part, you don't really need to assign soakers to them, we just naturally let them hit random players, and whenever your stacks go above 5 or 6 or so, you just move away from them until they begin to hit somebody else. Now these orbs, just like the oceanic ones, will despawn when the relic is activated for a second time, but this will just spawn a new set. The only other changes on the fight are actually applied to the individual boss's effects on their casts after they activate a relic. The Eldritch Abomination adds witness the end debuff on the raid after their cast now lasts 7 seconds rather than 6. To make this safe, you might need to add additional people into your interrupt rotation. For us, we don't use any on the first because of course we let that straight through. For the second ad we use 2 people, and for the last ad we use 4 people. And in situations where we don't want the first ad to go through straight away, we simply just add 1 additional person per interrupt rotation on each of the ads. Also, the ads now become immune to interrupts after 2 minutes, so for the guilds that decided to just keep them interrupted the entire fight, that's no longer a possibility. As for the Visage from Beyond ads, they now remain for 2 minutes rather than a minute and a half, and their cast is 15 seconds long, not 20. This forces you to swap to it one more time than you did previously. Some guilds actually opt not to kill them at all after the bosses have been moved from that particular relic and just use a Tremor Totem and healing cooldowns on their Terrifying Echoes cast, but we don't really do that at all apart from once in the entire fight. But if you're struggling on boss damage, you may want to consider doing it. As for the overall relic order, we do double Trident, then double Void, and then end with double Storm. And the Feared always activates a new relic first each time. Now before we break down exactly how that looks, let's go back to the main problem in the encounter, which is the boss's health pool. So the fight has a 9-minute and 30-second enrage timer, and to beat that you need to make the most of the Promises of Power buff by having it on all the DPS for as long as possible. The only limiting factor with this is when it comes to times where it needs to be removed. Now the fight can be 4 healed, but it is worth using 5 for extra cooldowns, and this also gives you 5 dispels. And for people thinking about using Master Spell, the rack damage from dispelling a player hits for around 70k, so dispelling 3 players is super dangerous, and 4 or 5 players you're just going to one-shot yourself. If healers dispel early, then they can potentially dispel 10 players before lethal damage comes in. This, however, does require very early dispels, which does reduce your boss damage drastically. Ideally, your healers would only dispel a single debuff each time, so we assign our healers to a single player each. As for the rest of the raid, well, for us they were just Warlocks and Shadow Priests. Warlocks can dispel themselves with their imps, and Shadow Priests can Master Spell, if they of course place it so it only hits themselves. So when do you need to dispel? You need to 100% before every set of Eldritch adds, and 1 dispel might need to be made during it. A new Dark Herald buff can be applied during the adds depending on when you push the boss, which can make the last explosion go off whilst the player has a high stack promise buff. We just have a random healer dispel this when the Dark Herald is timed out. However, if the Dark Herald is applied quite late into the adds, to the point where the last head will explode with the raid only having 3 to 5 stacks, then it's safe to get a new Promises buff on the raid and no dispels are needed. The only other time that you need to dispel is on Crushing Doubt. This on Mythic deals around 60k per debuff when the player moves around 30 to 35 yards away from the raid. This means the entire raid is going to be hit for 120k magic damage in a single burst. With 9 stacks of Promises of Power, you'll probably have around 26k health with 415 item level or so. So you have to dispel it, unless you can cheese it in some way, such as if you're a Shadow Priest with a little help from a disc. Crushing Doubt comes in every 45 seconds, with 2 disc priests. That means you can have Raptor shields for every single set. A non-crit Raptor shield, depending if the target had Atonement beforehand and your overall mastery and gear, is a minimum of 55k. If you add your own Shadow Priest non-crit shield, which is around 20k, you can set up Shadow Priests to shield each other, giving at least another 20k, as well as the Sanctum trait, which makes it so when you fade, you get a 23k shield. This can bring the total damage of Crushing Doubt hit to essentially nothing, and it will be completely absorbed. You can make this even safer by using the Life Grip trait and grip each other before the damage comes in, giving you another 33k shield per trait. The only time we recommend dispelling a priest is when the Crushing Doubt is actually on them. However, if you're quick to Raptor shield them before they move out and reapply a new shield before it explodes, it's possible not to have to dispel them even in this situation, and this can be made even safer if that particular priest disperses towards the end of the dot, or you make use of trinkets like Voidstone on them. It's something that you may want to try, just know that the dot from the Crushing Doubt is pretty nasty, especially towards the end. But by doing all of this, it does allow priests to keep the buff throughout pretty much most of the fight and essentially carry damage, only really needing to dispel them when a set of Eldritch Abomination adds come in. Now, priests are not the only classes that can survive a set of Crushing Doubts with 9 stacks. Any class with a good DR and a couple of priest shields should also be able to survive. But as we had 5 Shadow Priests, and with them being able to do it every single time, we rarely let people keep their promises, as we knew we already had the damage to beat the fight. You'll need to find your own balance, as Promises management varies wildly based on your comp. Work out what shields, DRs and immunities you have and assign them to the Crushing Doubts. The only time we no longer use this strategy with the priest is after the last Void Relic activation just before the first Storm. It's not safe to have the Storm damage and Promises at the same time, especially when Crushing Doubts can also align badly with Storm activations. And by this point, you should really have done enough damage to beat the timer of the boss anyway. By keeping it all the way up until that point also makes Trident Bubbles easy to destroy, Void Immunity quick to remove, and Vision adds easy to kill before their cast finishes. Do however keep in mind that with the raid having Promises most of the time, this limits the Void Crash circles to be soaked by only your healers and tanks. You'll want to soak them after 2 bounces. You can do it after 1, but you'll want to use a cooldown or a shield to make it safe.
Now before we end the video, we do need to explain Crushing Doubt timing. Now, Crushing Doubt, as already mentioned, does come in every 45 seconds, and ideally you'll want to work your damage on the bosses so it doesn't time poorly with Relic activations. This is really difficult to do unless you achieve it naturally with your damage, and as the enrage timer on the boss is tight, you can't really slow your damage down and wait for the Crushing Doubt to pass before you do decide to push the relics. For us, this was simply fixed with Bloodlust timing. On the pool, all the DPS gains the Promises buff on the first Dark Herald. Crushing Doubt then comes in pretty soon afterwards. However, the Promises buff hasn't had time to stack on the raid yet, so no cooldowns are really needed aside from like safety raptures on the players that are running out with Crushing Doubt. And after it has exploded, we Bloodlust. For us, this makes it so the next Crushing Doubt expires during the Eldritch adds, where everyone is already dispelled and we simply just use healing cooldowns to counter the 2 sets of incoming damage. This also lines up the same way for the second set of Eldritch adds, where everyone again is already dispelled. This damage also times a Crushing Doubt just before we push the first Storm Relic, which allows us to let adds go off pretty early during the Storm. The next Crushing Doubt comes in after the Storm, which can be safely comboed with an ad cast, again using healing cooldowns. The next comes in before we push the final Storm, which again allows us to safely deal with the Storm damage without any scary bursts of damage, aside from the Terrifying Echoes cast, which we actually let through because we don't have any promise buffs on the raid to burst the ad down quickly. And after this is done, there isn't really any overlaps left since all the relics are done. We just keep Promises one last time to finish off the Visage ad, and afterwards dispel all of them off and just never use them again and just finish the bosses off. Will this line up the exact same for your raid team? Possibly, and that's why we're mentioning it, but there is a chance that it won't, especially if you're not running a similar raid comp. As a result, you may want to change your CD timing or your last timing to get Crushing Doubt to line up better for you, but we'd strongly recommend trying to follow our timing the best you can. We have a Google Doc linked in the description of this video that shows our Crushing Doubt timings as well as our healing cooldowns for the entire fight. The file is read-only, but you can make a copy for yourself if you wish to make your own changes.
But that should be everything that you need to know, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you give us a like. And before we do go, make sure you go check out our written guide over on Wowhead. It recaps everything that we've covered in this video in more detail and should help you significantly when it comes to understanding all of the mechanics. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Catch you later.